Hey there, welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight I want to talk about using things. What makes something useful? Who gets to decide what is useful or useless? And what happens when some people use things in a way that wasn't intended, or even worse, when some people refuse to be useful? Tonight we're going to be drawing from two books, What's the Use by Sara Ahmed and Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell. I just happened to read these two books close together, and I think they absolutely belong in conversation with each other. In terms of content warnings, we're going to touch on a couple heavy subjects such as ableism, racism, and queerphobia. It won't be too graphic, but just wanted to give you the heads up. Anyway, let's get nasty. What does it mean to use something? It can mean to employ it for a purpose, such as using a kettle to boil water. It can mean to expend or consume something, such as using airline miles to acquire a plane ticket. It can also mean to exploit something or to take advantage of it, such as using a natural disaster to price gouge. And finally, use can refer to something becoming habituated to a situation. Think of someone in Arizona telling you they eventually got used to the heat. Use can describe both the design of a thing, what it's intended to do, and it can also describe a relationship between things, such as who is meant to use it and the environment around them they're meant to use it in. Think about a door. A door is meant to allow access between two spaces that would otherwise be inaccessible to each other. However, many doors have locks, meaning that only some people are meant to use that door, and that some spaces are meant to be closed off to some people. Now you might be thinking, this isn't exactly exploring one of life's great mysteries there, Phil. What's the point? To answer that, consider one more object, a path. A path is formed when people begin to walk the same route between two locations. The more people who use that path, the deeper it becomes gouged into the landscape, and thus, the easier it is for a future passerby to see it and use it themselves. When people see a well-used path, it can often appear to be a natural feature of the environment. In her book, What's the Use?, Sara Ahmed puts it like this: once something has been used, you are encouraged to go in that direction. Your progression would be eased. Used involves not only a description of a condition, but an invitation. The more a path is used, the more a path is used. How strange that this sentence makes sense. A history of use is a history of things becoming natural. Later, she reiterates this idea in a provocative way. In other words, when things are made to enable the progression of an assumed user who is singular, fit, upright, and able, they seem not artificial, but natural. Part of what makes Ahmed's book so interesting is that it forces us to look at almost every banal object around us with fresh eyes. She helps us see that the cups in our cupboard, the clothes in our closets, the chairs in our offices, the roads in our cities, and the cars that drive on them, and the buildings they go to are designed for use, and within those designs is concealed the people meant to use them, and thus the people who aren't. She's inviting us to dig deeper when something feels natural, normal. Professor Amy Hamray writes, "Examine any doorway, window, toilet, chair, or desk, and you will find the outline of the body meant to use it." After quoting them, Ahmed goes on to say, regarding the concept of usability, it is not just whether an object or environment can be used, but who can use an object or environment given how it has been designed and who cannot. If the world has not been built to accommodate you, it takes much more out of you to do the same thing compared to those who are accommodated. This is the crux of the issue for me. Some of us can drift through life not paying attention to the designs around us because those designs don't hinder our progression. Even worse, some of us are building those designs without always considering who is excluded by them. And that goes far beyond stuff like cups, chairs, and paths. Ahmed's book shows how everything from education systems to sexual harassment complaint processes carry designs that enable and protect some while disabling and exposing others. Likewise, this goes beyond considering able-bodied status in designs and extends to identity categories such as race, sexuality, gender identity, immigration status, and more. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, well, I'm not a university dean or an industrial engineer or an architect, so what does this have to do with me? Part of the answer is that I think it only benefits us to be cognizant of the world around us and to demand greater access and dignity from spaces and products we encounter. Recall Ahmed's axiom, the more a path is used, the more a path is used. We are the feet tamping down the grass on a path. We are the ones using things in ways that reinforce the sense of how they should be used. Beyond that, though, I think we underestimate just how much designing we do in everyday life. Are you arranging a meeting at work? Are you organizing activism via a Discord server? Are you streaming on Twitch or, writing video essays? Disgusting. Are you hosting a D&D night? I'm here to tell you those activities also have an outline of the bodies meant to participate, as well as outlines of the ethnicities, sexualities, and genders meant to feel welcome, meant to be enabled, meant to progress. Have you ever stopped to think who might be having to expend twice the effort just to get in the door? Have you ever considered who might be leaving those activities twice as exhausted? Are some people in these spaces working twice as hard to only go half as far? Here I'll conclude with the words of disability activist Rosemary Garland Thompson. One of the fundamental premises of disability politics is that social justice and equal access should be achieved by changing the shape of the world, not changing the shape of our bodies. In the same way that it's important to think about how objects and spaces have intended uses that enable some people over others, I think it's also important to think about the concept of usefulness itself. At first glance, the idea of usefulness feels self-evident. Something is useful if you can use it. And while that might be true for things like claw hammers and coat hangers, all throughout history and even into the present day, the concept of usefulness is a weapon that some people wield as an excuse to steal and invade. For example, philosopher Edward Said wrote, "Imperialism was the theory, colonialism the practice of changing the uselessly occupied territories of the world into useful new versions of European metropolitan society." Meaning, European colonizers sailed all around the world and saw other people enjoying their land in ways that didn't extract enough value to be worthy of respect. Why, it was practically a kindness for Sir Kensington Pissguzzle to appropriate that land and show the natives how to really get the most out of it. Ahmed writes, "The word useless is a powerful tool, a way of designating some beings as being without value, a way of discarding people as well as things. The word unused is also a word that is deeply political, as a frame, as a technique, all the more the moment it appears to be used as mere description." While obviously not on the same level as colonialism, I think about this idea a lot when I hear crypto bros talking about NFTs. Lately, when talking about adding NFTs to online shooters or Magic the Gathering, you'll hear them say stuff like, "Aren't you tired of spending money that you won't get back on these games? Don't you want your playtime to actually be working for you? Wouldn't you love to see a return on your investment in these games?" In the crypto bro mind, things like art and play and recreation are unused. Value is not being extracted from them, making them useless. You and I play games to unwind after a long day by screaming in a frothing rage when we die to Sister Frida's cheap fucking unblockable grab in the third fucking stage of her interminable fucking boss fight. But to the crypto bro, relaxation and catharsis aren't making the line go up. So these free market pay pigs are doing everything possible to steal your hobbies from you to financialize them. Uselessness as a designation has also been weaponized against more than just land and objects, unfortunately. Ahmed writes, "The history of cotton shows us how we cannot understand capitalism without reference to colonialism and slavery. The expansion of this industry depended on slaves in the southern United States growing cotton on land expropriated from the Native Americans. The slave becomes an empty vessel to be occupied, enjoyed, and used up. A history of the requirement to be useful is also a history of exhaustion. Use becomes for some a form of biological destiny as well as bodily depletion. Race and class work together to create a set of expectations of who will be useful for what. of what some bodies are for. The extraction of use from some bodies by defining others as bodies to be used was justified as a mission to improve humanity. Not only did Europeans decide that indigenous land was unused and thus up for grabs, they decided entire communities of people weren't allowed to just be themselves and live as they wished. They were obligated to be useful, only useful as defined by Sir Kensington Pissguzzle and his rich white friends. In order to justify this theft of humanity, an entire morality of duty had to be conjured, with concepts like degeneracy and criminality and the natural order deployed against people from whom value could not be sufficiently extracted. This moral code became the basis for everything from the development of schools to the expansion of the police state in Western countries such as the US and the UK. A few quotes from Ahmed. Disuse becomes degeneracy when something is not being used that is supposed to be used. A virtue is understood as how human beings acquire the qualities that would enable them to fulfill what is assumed as their station. And so, if industry became virtue, idleness became vice. Vices can thus be understood as that which would compromise the extraction of utility, and vice also became a means of locating pathology in different classes of people. It's tempting to hear that and picture Victorian-era Ebenezer Scrooge grumbling that the poor should either submit themselves to the abusive workhouses or else die to reduce the surplus population. Unfortunately, this cult of usefulness is still going strong to this day. Just in the last few years, Republican legislators have called people on government assistance parasites and claim that black recipients are living on a new plantation. Governors have proposed drug testing people on food assistance, and even Democratic mayors have referred to homelessness as a cancerous sore because of how it creates a feeling of disorder. When I was a cop, I participated in this criminalization of poverty frequently. We made it a crime to steal someone else's recycling. It was a crime to loiter or to keep your tent too close to a railroad track. It was a crime to steal drinking water from the spout behind a factory. Anything we could criminalize allowed us to arrest and forcefully relocate the poor and the homeless. And these arrests and citations would lead to compounding fines. If you didn't show up to court because you couldn't pay a fine for loitering, a judge would increase the penalty. If a single mother couldn't afford car insurance and couldn't pay the ticket for driving to work without it, those fines would follow her, increasing every time she got caught. Add to this disabled people who can't work or who want to work but are refused accommodations and thus receive government assistance. In the United States, these people are intentionally kept in a state of poverty. They aren't allowed to amass any real assets, such as a car or a house. Many can't get married because adding a spouse's income would boot them from their meager stipend. If poverty in the United States is criminalized, and disabled people are forcefully kept in poverty, doesn't that mean that disability itself is de facto criminalized in the United States? There's a reason for that. Disabilities limit the amount of value that can be extracted from a person. Under capitalism, this is vice. This is pathology. This is unacceptable. Ahmed says it like this. Tactics for demonizing others as useless turn violence into a moral right. Use becomes a command as well as a threat. If to be idle or useless is not to support what is being accomplished, then to be idle or useless is not to be supported. In the previous two sections, we've explored two aspects of use, one being the way that the design of something often excludes certain types of people from using it, and the other being that uselessness is often deployed against poor people, disabled people, and people of color to justify neglecting them or doing violence to them. If you stayed with me until this point, I imagine you're having a reaction similar to mine. What can we do about this? I'd love to give you an easy answer like, abolish capitalism. Seriously though, abolish capitalism. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So in the meantime, what should our response be to designs that exclude and societies built to use us up? This is where I want to bring in the other author who inspired this video, Legacy Russell. In her book Glitch Feminism, Russell explores many different sides to the concept of a glitch, in the sense of an error, a mistake, or a failure to function. For Russell, glitches are ways of subverting and dismantling the gender binary and the ways dominant society requires our bodies to be legible, classifiable, and yes, useful. In the introduction, she explains one of the ideas informing glitch feminism. With physical movement often restricted, female-identifying people, queer people, black people invent ways to create space through rupture. Here we can already see Russell in conversation with Sara Ahmed's environments that fail to accommodate certain kinds of progression. Ahmed points to a path and says, "You can see the outline of who is meant to get ahead on this path," to which Russell replies, "Well, I don't fit that outline, so fuck that, I'm gonna reroute it." In glitch feminism, Russell responds to exclusionary use via deliberate misuse. Likewise, she responds to demands to be useful with strategic uselessness. She writes, "The glitch creates a fissure within which new possibilities of being and becoming manifest. The failure to function within the confines of a society that fails us is a pointed and necessary refusal." She later expands on this idea by saying, "If Audre Lorde's 1984 declaration that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house still holds true, then perhaps what these institutions, both online and off, require is not dismantling, but rather mutiny in the form of strategic occupation. The glitch challenges us to consider how we can penetrate, break, puncture, tear the material of the institution." You can see why reading Glitch Feminism at the same time I was reading What's the Use was so interesting. While Ahmed describes all the ways things are made useful, Russell is talking about rupture, fissures, penetrations, breaks, punctures, and tears. Things that describe ways that containers become less useful, less able to do what they were designed to do. This happened again and again as I read. For example, when Ahmed says that a history of use is a history of things becoming natural, Russell replies, "The normative ordinary is of violence, suggesting a natural order in lieu of a most unnatural system of control." Or when Russell writes that the glitch is something that extends beyond the most literal technical mechanics, it helps us celebrate failure as a generative force. Ahmed nods as she mentions how misfit provides an incentive to change. The failure of things to work creates an incentive to make new things. In fact, I would argue that Russell provides a blunt and perfect response to the state of affairs Ahmed's book describes when she gives what I consider glitch feminism's thesis statement. We have the right to deny our use. In Glitch Feminism, Legacy Russell's primary method of puncturing systems and denying her own use is by glitching out the gender binary. Gender is where Russell feels the call to fight back against capitalism, patriarchy, and other hierarchies designing spaces which impede her progression. If you're not someone for whom gender feels like a site of oppression for you, we can return to Sara Ahmed for another idea about how to generate ruptures and fissures of our own. The conclusion of What's the Use is a long discussion of the concept of queer use. Ahmed defines this in several different ways, so I'm going to take some artistic liberties and Frankenstein a quote that gets to the heart of the idea. She writes, "To queer use is to make use audible, to listen to use, to bring to the front what ordinarily recedes into the background. Queer use as when you use something for a purpose that is very different from that which is originally intended. An opening created for convenience can have queer potential. It can mean lessening control of what or who can pass through. When things are used by those for whom they were not intended, the effect can be queer. Queer use, when we aim to shatter what has provided a container. The system is working by stopping those who are trying to transform the system. This means that to transform a system, you have to stop it from working." The very image on the cover of the book is an example of queer use. Birds have built a nest inside a mailbox, and someone has left a note instructing people not to put mail in it. In other words, someone is using a thing not intended for them in a manner it wasn't designed for, disrupting the system that thing is a part of. Ahmed frames it this way. Creating a shelter and disrupting usage can refer to the same action. This is why I started the video with a quick discussion of use and design. If we're not constantly interrogating the designs we encounter every day, We're missing clues about who those designs cram down into the margins. And if we miss those clues, we're missing opportunities to either dismantle them, or to misuse or refuse to use them in order to create space for the excluded. This comes in many forms. A historic example is work stoppages and wildcat strikes. When your workplace becomes a site for your dehumanization, one of the most powerful things you and your coworkers can do is put down your tools, or even just use them very slowly. Capitalism demands profits in ways that incentivize businesses to abuse their workers. Why not use that profit motive as a weapon fired in the other direction by clogging up profits until conditions change? I think, too, of bus drivers in New York and Minneapolis refusing to allow police to commandeer their buses in order to remove anti-brutality protesters from a protest. Legally, police can commandeer city vehicles for police business, but they couldn't force bus drivers to put hands on steering wheels or feet on gas pedals. Or instead of a refusal to use dehumanizing designs, how about very publicly using the thing that excludes you to highlight the exclusion? I'm thinking here of disabled activists crawling up the steps of the US Capitol to demand passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The very unusability of an environment became a weapon against unusable environments. This prefigures Ahmed's assertion that you counter the violence of a system by revealing the violence of a system. How's this for queer use? A brick, designed to be used by construction workers to build buildings, instead picked up by some unknown queer lost to history and flung at the head of a homophobic cop, sparking a pivotal moment in the struggle for queer rights. I assure you the brickmaker did not have that use or that user in mind when they fetched it from the kiln. Beyond protests, there are tons of ways to strategically misuse things. It could be using your office break room to start a conversation about unions. It could be using a hex key to remove anti-homeless bars from benches. It could be making hundreds of bogus reports on a website used to narc on unlawful abortions, or sending hundreds of fake job applications to a business hiring scabs. It could even be something as simple as squirreling away some unsold grub from your fast food job to give away to hungry people who need it. In a system that intentionally impedes the progress of anyone with the gall to be poor, disabled, trans, or non-white, nearly anything you do to shelter those people, and anything you do to survive if you are one, is a form of misuse, is a glitch. I'll leave you with this call to action from Legacy Russell. We reject being bought and sold. We feel no shame about turning our backs on a market that wants to eat us alive. We will strategize and collectivize towards uselessness, a failure that imagines, innovates, and emancipates. We will find life, joy, and longevity in breaking what needs to be broken. There's so much more to these books I wish I could give you right now. Ahmed's book deals with topics like the development of schools and the ways that institutions are built to silence those who are excluded by their design. Russell's book explores gender in the context of art, technology, privacy, and economics with exhilarating urgency. Unfortunately, I just couldn't fit everything into this video. But I give both books my highest of recommendations, and don't worry, I only scratched the surface of what they have to offer you. Anyway, what do you think about all this? What are some ways that an object's use excludes you? What are some objects that outline bodies that don't resemble yours? More importantly, what are some ways that we can misuse and fail to use the tools of our own abuse? How have you implemented queer use in your life? What have you glitched out in pursuit of a better world? Queer use is such a broad and complex topic that I'm really excited to hear what you think about it, so go hog wild in the comments. If you like this video, I think you know what to do by now. Rate it 5 stars on Letterboxd, submit it for an ePulitzer, and please, please, please remember to write a thank you note to Gonzalo P. YouTube mentioning this video by name. It seriously helps it reach more eyes. I really appreciate you spending some time with me on this topic tonight, and I hope it inspires you to create more shelters and ruptures in your community. Hope to see you on the next one. Good night.